A book is more than words on paper. It's a complex project between people. That was said to me by my friend and former Navy SEAL, Chris Fussell. And I think this podcast, the Learning Leader Show, is a very complex project among people. Me chasing my curiosity with great rigor, trying my best to understand the uncommon commonalities among people who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time. And I'm doing my best to ask interesting questions to pull out the genius from each of my guests. And so towards the end of 2024, I decided to sit down and write down some of the key learnings. This certainly doesn't encompass the entire year and all 52 plus episodes and conversations, but it did get at some of them. So I'm going to share some of the key learnings, and I'd love to hear from you. What were some of the most useful learnings that you picked up over the course of 2024 listening to the Learning Leader Show? First, say what's true. This came from Nikki Glazer. I asked her, she's become a world-class comedian, got really famous a couple months after we recorded when she was the star of the show at Tom Brady's roast. But I asked her, I said, Nikki, what do you do when you're bombing? Like comedians, they get up on stage all the time. It doesn't always go perfectly. And she said, just say what's true. Just say what's true. Everyone is putting on a mask. Everyone's trying to present in a different way. But if you just say what's true, it's the funniest. And I think that's a great metaphor for life when you're with friends, when you're on stage, when you're having a conversation with your boss or someone on your team. Just say what's true. We all know it, but we're afraid to say it. And I think that's what makes Nikki so good as a roaster or a comedian is she's willing to just say what's true. And that's actually the funniest part. And I think it's best from a leadership perspective. Then next, make the ask. Ariel Helwani, a great MMA commentator, has built an incredible career for himself. But he got hired at ESPN to be a specialist when it comes to MMA, mixed martial arts, and the UFC. And he's built a lot of great relationships. He was early within the UFC, so he's super valuable to have at ESPN as they got this new contract for covering the MMA fights. And Ariel, though, was a huge basketball fan. And so shortly after he got hired for one area of the company, he actually found the executive producer who's in charge of the NBA for ESPN. He simply went up and knocked on his door and he said, hey, I know you don't know who I am and I didn't get hired here to cover basketball games, but I would love to be a sideline reporter for NBA games. And the executive was caught off guard. He didn't really know who he was because he was focused on his sport. And Ariel just kind of kept asking and kept showing him tape of saying like, hey, I think I'd be good at this. I love basketball. I love the NBA. And so less than a year later, he found himself on the sidelines as a broadcaster for NBA games on ESPN. I think the learning is you got to make the ask. That would have never happened if you didn't have the guts to knock on the door of a very powerful person at a very powerful company and say, I'd like to do this. I think I'd be good at it. And I watched him. He was incredible at it on the NBA because you can tell he's super passionate about the sport. He's super passionate about that thing. And so if there's something you're passionate about and you've put in lots of work and you feel like you could be really good at it, you got to make the ask. And I think it's a similar story to what Scott Galloway told me when he was at the Raleigh Hotel in Miami, Florida. And he's laying out at the pool and he looks over and sees a beautiful woman. And he said he made a promise to himself that he wasn't going to leave that pool until going up and introducing himself to that woman. And so Scott got some of the courage and he stood up and walked over and introduced himself. And now, many, many years later, Scott is married to that woman. They have two sons together, and the middle name of one of those sons is Raleigh, named after that day when they met at the Raleigh Hotel pool. And Scott said to me, to do anything of significance in your life, you must take an uncomfortable risk. Usually the greatest rewards are preceded by something that's really hard and really risky. So you have to be willing to make the ask, as Ariel did, as Scott has done. I think this is definitely a commonality among leaders who have sustained excellence. They make the ask. Jim Dethmer talked about taking ownership. He said this to me: I commit to taking full responsibility for the circumstances of my life and my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. I commit to supporting others to take full responsibility for their lives. I have to equals a victim mindset. I choose to equals an ownership mindset. So to me, at the effect of all other things, outside of my locus of control is to me, by me is inside. That means I am the cause of the experience. I have radical responsibility. How am I causing this experience? That also relates to Hall of Fame poker player Daniel Negreanu when he said there's a difference between a victim and an owner mentality. Victims will complain, give up, sulk, be passive aggressive, or procrastinate. These are the people at the poker table where Daniel plays who will just blame all of the bad things that happen to them on the cards, on the dealer, on other players. They won't take ownership over the negative things that happen. Whereas owners, they seek solutions, they take action, they ask for help. Victims will focus on things they cannot control, while owners will focus on the things they can control. I love the story Bill Urey told me on the podcast about life's work. He said he was on a hike in Colorado with Jim Collins, and Jim said to him, "When did you first discover your interest in and instinct for what became your life's work?" This is a question that's worth asking. What is your life's work? What are you doing to ensure this one sentence is something that you're proud of? And I think that's something useful for all of us to consider is what is my life's work and how am I aggressively pursuing that? That doesn't mean like, hey, follow your passion. You'll never work a day in your life. That's not true. I'm doing something I'm deeply passionate about. I feel like I work really hard at it every single day, but I think it's worth it to think about what was I put here to do? What is my life's work? And then aggressively pursuing that. Be grateful. This came from the legendary Hall of Famer and now one of my teammates, which I can't believe and I'm so grateful for, and that's Sherry Cole. She said, "You can't roll up your sleeves and clench your fist at the same time. Living with gratitude is about recognizing and appreciating what you have." And then Garen Stokes followed it up on the very same conversation with my Learning Leader team of coaches. He was introduced to Oklahoma State's football coach, Mike Gundy, from Sherry. She set up a meeting where then Garen got to go spend some time within the coaches' meetings, watching practice and having conversations with Coach Mike Gundy, who's done an extraordinary job at Oklahoma State over decades now. Coach Gundy said to his staff as they were getting ready for practice, quote, "I can't believe they pay us to do this." Like this mentality of being so grateful for what you get to do, not what you have to do, what you get to do every day, that you can't believe they pay them to do it. Tony Robbins, big one for me, talked about his mentor, Jim Rohn. And he was meeting with Jim, fortunately, early in his life. And Jim told him, "Your job is to become more valuable. We are all equal as souls, but not equal in the marketplace. If you want to do things to get better, you've got to get better." When I asked Tony about the commonalities he's seen of leaders who have sustained excellence over time, he talked about Steph Curry's practice habits. You know, the greatest shooter of all time, Steph Curry. You are rewarded in public for what you practice in private. Steph Curry has taken hundreds of thousands or millions of more shots in practice when nobody's watching than he has during the games when we are all watching. And I think that's a commonality among those who sustain excellence, is that they are rewarded in public for what they practice in private. What are you doing in private to get better for what everyone else sees in public? And I think that's like what Muhammad Ali talked about. You see him dancing under those lights, as he would say. You didn't see all of the work he put in behind the scenes in the dark so that when the lights were shining bright, he was ready to go. I love the Mike Beckham story. Mike Beckham is the CEO of Simple Modern, and he's built this company from nothing into being worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And when he was in college, he wanted to take a class taught by this legendary professor named Rufus Fears. But Professor Fears' classes always maxed out immediately as soon as they came online. And so Mike showed up on the first day because you could get a pink slip at University of Oklahoma where he went to school. Pink slip means you could just add the class like the day it starts. But Professor Fears had tons of people who wanted pink slips. And so as soon as class started that day, he said, "If you're trying to get a pink slip, I can tell you the class is full and there will be no pink slips given." But Mike didn't let that stop him. He stayed in the class. He showed interest, raised his hand. Then he showed up to office hours for Professor Fears. He showed up extra, asked, told him, "Hey, this is why I'm interested in you. This is why I love the way that you teach." He was very specific in his praise, and he's very specific in his ask of Professor Fears. And he was also relentless. Now, he didn't go so hard that he got the cops called him, but he was relentless in asking and praising and sharing with specificity as to why he wanted to join his class. And he earned a pink slip. And not only that, but he earned entrance into multiple classes taught by Professor Fears. And I think, again, it gets back to going after what you want, making the ask, being relentless, being resilient. Don't let the first no be the end of it. The no means not yet, and you keep after it. I love Scott Belsky's idea of adding texture to time. He told me you're only able to recollect experiences with enough friction to add texture to time as it passes. Time spent doing the unexpected and or being challenged is time with texture. Ultimately, in our dying breath, the more experiences in our lives with texture, the more of our lives we will actually remember, and the longer we will feel we have lived. What adds texture to time? A challenge. This is why it's good for us to regularly be pushing our edges, doing something that makes us uncomfortable, makes us scared. We're not fully prepared or ready to do it yet. We're not a master yet. We have a beginner's mindset. I think that's how we could add texture to time. I think that's a big one. Scott also shared the story of his aunt Arliss, and she said to him, "You're either part of the living or part of the dying." She fought stage 4 cancer for 15 years. And Scott thinks part of the reason she was able to stay alive for so long with stage 4 cancer, a death sentence, was she focused on the living elements instead of the dying ones. She didn't think about dying. She thought about living. She worked in her garden. So she planted things that she wanted to see them bloom, right? She thought about the future. She made great breakfast. She's planned travel and trips and went on those trips, right? She said you have to decide if you want to live less or live more. And she decided to live more. And I think this is a lesson for all of us, regardless of what's happening in our lives. We could either choose to be part of the living or part of the dying. And I think it's worth it to be choosing to be part of the living. Inner or outer scoreboard. So we wrote a book this year called The Score That Matters, and it stemmed from this Warren Buffett quote. The big question about how people behave is whether they've got an inner scorecard or an outer scorecard. It helps if you can be satisfied with an inner scorecard. I think this is what my friend, mentor, co-author Brooke Cups has gotten so good at living based on his inner scorecard. So good at, in fact, that I asked him to write this book with me because I wanted to get better at living within my inner scorecard, which are my values, the critical behaviors to align with those values, my purpose. All of those are so important. And I think Brooke has helped me immensely at getting better at being more thoughtful, thankful, curious, and consistent. And living out those values and bringing them to life each day is critical. That's how I can live a life of me only comparing myself to my previous self as opposed to comparing myself to the highlight reels of others on social media, because that comparison becomes the thief of joy. And we all struggle with this, some more than others, and I certainly do. And that's why I wanted to focus so hard on partnering with somebody who's further ahead than I am when it comes to living by that inner scoreboard. So it's you defining what success means for you, not what society deems as successful. And part of that is getting very clear on your purpose, core values, and the critical behaviors to match. Then the David Perell conversation one had a lot of good parts, but one of them is when we talked about standards and setting really high standards. Now, David's taught tens of thousands of people how to write, 70 plus countries. That's what he is as a writing teacher. But he also is running a company. And he said, quote, "It's your job to have the highest quality standards of anybody you work with." Now, he said, every day you'll face pressure to lower them. So true. Don't do it. If you can set a high standard and maintain it and raise it, you'll do very well for yourself. I think that's crucial. Is high standard people want to be surrounded by others who set high standards and who are regularly pushing the standard higher. And if you want to be excellent, if you want to lead people and impact them in a great way, I think you have to set a high standard and be regularly pushing that higher, even though society will push you to be more average. Don't let that happen. We have to keep pushing the standard. Then what are your 100 shots? This came from lacrosse legend, the LeBron James of lacrosse, Paul Rabil. He was in high school and a coach came and spoke to a group of players, and Paul was in that group of players. And he said, "Hey, I can guarantee you a way you can earn a college scholarship." And Paul perked up. He's like, "What? You got to do this one thing, just one thing. You need to take 100 shots a day, no exceptions, no days off. If you don't feel well, get your 100 shots. If it's Christmas, get your 100 shots. You don't have a goal to shoot on, use a wall. Nothing can get in your way. If you want to earn a college scholarship, get your 100 shots a day, no matter what. You cannot miss a day, the coach said. So Paul never, ever missed a day. Every single day from that day moving forward, he never missed a day, including when he became the greatest lacrosse player in the world. He still never missed a day of those 100 shots. And I think that's a great lesson for us is what are your 100 shots? What are the things that you're willing to do every day, day after day, no matter what? Most people will skip days. Most people can't consistently show up with excellence like Paul Rabil can. Most people can't do it, but that's what separates the excellent from the average or the good. Now, if you want to be just average or good, then you're fine. But if you want to be excellent or have a chance at excellence, what are your 100 shots a day and what are you willing to do in order to get those 100 shots a day in every day, no matter what? Then great story from Jason Fried. You never know who was watching. Jason was giving a talk at a conference many years ago, and he shared stories about his company and the growth of his company and how they've built it and their values and their unique way of doing it. And what did you know? Jeff Bezos was sitting in the front row and he watched Jason's entire keynote. Jason had no idea at the time that this was happening, but he was so impressed that he pulled him aside and said, "I'd like to invest in your company." And Jason said, "Hey, we don't take on outside investors. We don't need the money." And Jeff basically said, "No, I'm going to invest in your company." And he still is an investor who's paid out dividends to this day. And that was 20 plus years ago. And that's a great reminder is like, we never know who is watching. And so it's on us to be overly prepared and to meet the moment, every time. And that's why consistency is one of my core values is regardless of what's happening, I need to consistently show up with excellence no matter what. You never know who's watching. Jeff Bezos might be in the front row of your next keynote, and him being there could change your life or somebody else like that. And so I like the way that Jason was ready for that and ready to respond in a moment's notice. You never know who's watching. Erica Ayers-Badan, who was Barstool's CEO, she gave useful career advice. Make your boss look good and know what your company is paying you to do. I think if you work in a job at a company, which most people do, you don't always fully grasp or understand, wait, what is my company paying me to do? How am I ensure I'm giving them a massive return on their investment in me? And then the second part is, what are you doing every day to make your boss look good or to make your boss's life easier? If you have a job with a boss, again, most of us do, then a big part of our job is making their life easier. What are you intentionally doing each day to make their life easier? And that's how Erica built such a great career. Tara Viswanathan, great one, CEO at Rupa, which is cool in the fact that roughly 6 months after I recorded that conversation with Tara, her company sold and she had a massive exit and found out she's pregnant around the exact same time. So 2024, massive year for Tara Viswanathan, selling her company, huge return and getting ready to have a baby. But she talked about the fact that as the leader, you cannot outsource the culture. You can't outsource even the fun. She said fun and culture cannot be outsourced. You cannot delegate, quote, culture carriers. You, the leader, are the ultimate culture carrier. It has to come from you. Now, you want it to get out within the organization, but it starts with you modeling that behavior. And I love that she has taken that very seriously and has never outsourced the culture to somebody else or to say, I don't have time for that. I got to be the CEO visionary and be in board meetings and all this stuff. No, yes, you do have to do all that work. Absolutely. And you have to be thinking about carrying the culture. Next one was, this is a good one from Ryan Holiday. So it's the only episode I recorded in person in 2024. I flew to Austin, then drove to Bastrop, Texas, where his Daily Stoic podcast studio is. And I did that because I wanted to deepen that relationship with one of my literary heroes, Ryan Holiday. And it was the 9th time we recorded. The other 8 had been on Zoom. I had seen Ryan at a conference before and shared a couple meals with him, but that has been many years ago. And so I wanted to get back together with him in person. And Ryan has this bit where he says that he chooses to pay the taxes of life gladly. Now, for me, just on that one example, the tax on that was I had to drive to the airport, get on an airplane, manage a flight delay and a layover, and get to Austin, then get an Uber, drive all the way out to Bastrop, carry all of our stuff, me and Eli Liker doing this, and then go in there and wait until we were ready to record, and then finally record, and then do it all over again with the travel and flight delays going back. All of that was a tax on that one experience to spend some time in person with one of my literary heroes, Ryan Holiday, and it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. There's no point in complaining about those taxes or saying, oh, I hate having to travel and get delayed, these things that are outside of my control. I'd rather pay those taxes gladly in order for that experience. And as Ryan said, the taxes, it's not just from the government. Annoying people are a tax on being outside your house. Delays are a tax on travel. Haters are a tax on having a YouTube channel. There's a tax on everything in life. You can whine or you can pay them gladly. And I think that's just such a great mantra for going through life. Regardless of what you do, there will be a tax. Let's pay them gladly as opposed to complaining about. Then Ann Mahlum, what a great conversation. She founded this nonprofit called Back on My Feet, which was essentially taking homeless people on runs, running with them, exercising, getting them going. And she started with one location, eventually grew it all over the country. And she said one of the things that she needed to do for these homeless, mostly men, for these homeless people was the fact that she needed to set and demand more from them. She said, I looked at these guys who are homeless and demanded nothing but pure excellence from them. It was almost as if they were waiting for someone to do that. She set high expectations. She demanded they be on time. They go on the runs. They don't miss, right? She just set higher standards than anybody else in their life had ever done. And they wanted to live up to them for Ann. And I thought that was just what an amazing impact. I mean, that's leadership. That's what good leaders do. They set high standards and they demand it of their people and they push them and nudge them and get them to perform at levels higher than even they thought they were capable of. And in her case, she's doing it with people who don't even have a home. So if she could do it for them, I feel like we can do it for anybody. It reminded me a little bit of Tyler Cowen's belief that we talked about years ago on the podcast. He calls it the high return activity of raising others' aspirations. In this case, he encouraged someone who came to him who was going for an MBA just to skip that and go straight to a PhD. And the guy was like, I don't even know that was possible. And he said, sure it is. And Tyler says, at critical moments in time, you can raise the aspirations of other people significantly, especially when they are relatively young, simply by suggesting they do something better or more ambitious than what they might have in mind. And I like this part. Quote, it costs you relatively little to do this, but the benefit to them and to the broader world may be enormous. So good. The high return activity of raising others' aspirations. Meg Meeker, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. I thought a book to have on your bedside if you're a dad with daughters. I also think it works for any parent with kids. But she said, quote, one of the best things fathers can do is raise their daughters' expectations of life. Very similar to what we just talked about before with Ann Mahlum that she did for homeless people. But right, one of the best things fathers can do is raise their daughters' expectations of life. That will directly affect how your daughter talks, how she dresses, how well she does in school, and even what sports or musical instruments she chooses to play. You can help her set goals, help her define a higher purpose for her life, and as a result, her self-esteem will skyrocket. And it will bring you closer because she'll recognize you as a leader and an ally, helping her to chart a better course, right? Let's believe that people are capable more than what they are currently doing. My high school offense coordinator, Ron Ullery, always said this to me, that he believed that people were capable of so much more than they thought of. And so that's one of his core motivations for pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's certainly what he did for me. And it got me to perform at levels higher than I even thought I was capable of, thus leading to a college scholarship and changing my life forever. So leaders, that's a big part of our job, just like Meg Meeker says for fathers and daughters. But I really think for leaders and followers or leaders in anybody is raising the level of expectation and then being there to support them, to care for them, to love them and help them as they're progressing in their careers. Let's just do one more because this is a cool one to end on. James Clear and Seth Godin. I was a huge fan of James Clear when he just wrote at jamesclear.com and fortunately built a relationship with him since he's a fellow Ohioan. And we were out to lunch about 6 months before Atomic Habits was going to publish. And we were talking about how he thought it was good and wanted to spread, didn't know at that time it was going to sell like 15 million plus copies and be one of the greatest selling books literally of all time. But he quoted something that Seth Godin had said years earlier. And that's, if you want word of mouth, right? That's the best way for a book to spread, right? Is word of mouth marketing. There's no better marketing than word of mouth. If you want word of mouth, you have to create something remarkable. And that means it's worthy of remark. Atomic Habits, certainly worthy of remark. Again, sold all these millions of copies for a good reason, because it's helped so many people. And then that has created word of mouth marketing. So I would say whatever it is you're striving to do, it needs to be remarkable. And that means worthy of remark, that it's impacting people in such a way that they can't help but want to tell other people about the impact it's having on them. So whatever it is we're doing in our careers, whether it's writing books, recording podcasts, giving speeches, or leading a team within a Fortune 500 company, we want to do it so well that people can't help want to spread the word about the impact we are having on them. Thank you again so much for your continued support of the Learning Leader Show. It is my favorite thing in the world to do, to have deep, long-form conversations with a person far wiser than me, to follow my curiosity obsessions with great rigor, to chase down those curiosities and try to learn as much as possible, to then synthesize what I'm learning and hopefully share it with you to make your lives better. I feel like that's what I was put here to do. That's part of my purpose, and I'm trying to live that out each day. So these are a few things I've learned from podcast guests in 2024. I hope you found them useful. Please send me a note. Let me know, Ryan@learningleader.com. If you have any questions, I love having conversations with you, with people who are thinking about trying to make yourself better, and you want to have dialogue with others who are doing the same. Thank you so much. I'm pumped for 2025. I hope you have a fantastic year.